Hello and welcome back to this I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm David Matlin and this is the Daily Debate. Well, the world powers met again this weekend in Geneva for the third time to discuss Iran's nuclear program. Well, after days of negotiations, the P5+1 reached an interim agreement with Iran in the early hours of the morning. Well, joining me tonight is Dr. Eldad Pardo. Thank you for being here. You're Iranian affairs expert and head of research at the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education at the Hebrew University. And Dr. Emily Landau, thank you as well, director of the Arms Control Program at the Institute for National Security Studies based here in Tel Aviv. Well, thank you both for being here tonight. Still a topic of discussion we've been on for a while now. There's definitely some new developments here to discuss. Dr. Landau, I'll start with you.
Yeah. Share
your views on the deal that was reached today. Wide open topic there, but how did it strike you?
Okay, well, I would say that I don't think that there's a real reason for celebration, but I don't think it's a disaster either. So it's somewhere in between. If we just take the logic of the Obama administration, what this deal was supposed to achieve. It's an interim deal. We're not talking about the comprehensive deal. The idea is to put time on the clock, right? So that the parties negotiate over the next 6 months for the comprehensive deal, but you don't want Iran advancing its program during those months, using that time in order to get ahead. So the idea is you get some kind of freeze, you cap their enrichment, you freeze the situation, you don't allow them to advance their program, and you negotiate the deal. And in return for Iran agreeing to cap its program, it gets a little bit of sanctions relief, but nothing that touches upon the really tough, biting sanctions. In theory, it sounds quite logical.
A step in the right direction.
Right.
Okay.
The problem is that in practice, I'm concerned that it's not going to play out according to this nice, neat, orderly logic that they have set up. And I think what we're probably going to see over the next 6 months is a lot of continued bickering and arguing and haggling.
Well, there's definitely some points of contention in the agreement here.
Well, it's not so much the points of contention. What we need to be aware of is that there are different interpretations. And I can already say that today we've seen the White House version of what was agreed, and we've seen the Iranian version of what was agreed. And even at this initial stage where yesterday, in the middle of the night, they got the agreement, already we have two versions that are not identical. And this just, is an indication of what we're going to see down the line. Differences in interpretation, the Iranians coming to the P5+1, saying you're not upholding your part of the agreement in good faith. We should get more sanctions relief. Why don't you give us a gradual process, et cetera, et cetera. And these 6 months, these same 6 months, are supposed to be the 6 months that are devoted to a very difficult negotiation to get the comprehensive deal. So I'm wondering how those two things are going to work together and how realistic it is to believe that in 6 months they have even a chance of getting a comprehensive deal. And this is cause for concern.
Well, it certainly seems like in the meantime, Iran has succeeded to get some important elements reached here in this agreement, up to $6 to $7 billion in sanctions relief for now, which are mostly some frozen oil revenue. Dr. Pardo, what are your thoughts on this agreement today? How did you interpret this?
Well, I think that there are, of course, some good parts to the agreement, but what concerns me most is the term interim agreement. For every Israeli who went through the Oslo process, this is a kind of a red flag, because we go to the interim agreement, and then there is the final agreement. Of course, you postponed everything to the final agreement. So each side tries to improve his situation for the final agreement. Now, we had very good peace agreement with Egypt. There were stages. There was a roadmap. It was achieved. Same with Jordan. When we came to the Oslo process, we had this interim agreement. Why there was no final agreement with the Palestinians? There was no agreement because there was no agreement. So we are at the same stage here. There is no agreement because there is no agreement. Now the question is, what will happen 6 months down the road? I think that paradoxically, the only advantage of this interim agreement is that it was, in a way, an Iranian victory. This means that from the perspective of the American administration and the world powers, they went the extra mile towards Iran. This is important for Iranian public opinion. It's important for American public opinion. So if we have a confrontation six months down the line, then there is much more clout on the side of those who would like to end this project.
What about some of the key elements here that they couldn't agree on today? For example, sort of agreed to disagree over the right to enrich uranium under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Another aspect here is the Arak heavy water plutonium reactor. They agreed to freeze activities but not dismantle the facilities there. Dr. Landau, how do you feel about those specific points that were sort of left unclosed here?
Well, again, I mean, these are issues where there are different interpretations, and when you have room for different interpretations to come into play, you can be sure that you are going to have continued problems down the line. And as I said, the next 6 months are probably going to be problematic. On the other side, I would say that actually with regard to these two issues in particular, I think the P5+1 did hold their ground. They did not give in to the Iranian demands to change that. So it does not say explicitly that Iran has a right to enrich uranium. They will try to put a spin on this that they do, but you can't really make the case that they do. And of course they don't, even according to the NPT, but probably don't have time to go into that. With regard to Arak, again, the original clause before the French came into the story and changed it, the clause was a very problematic one because it said they would not commission the facility for 6 months, but they could continue construction work. But that, in any case, was the situation before the deal. They had no intention of commissioning it for the next 6 months, but they did need to continue construction work in order to be, on board to commission it in the latter half of 2014. So that was changed as well. They can't continue construction work. So actually, you can see those two particular issues as something where the P5+1 was adamant. They did use the leverage that they now have in these talks, and they didn't cave. I think for the coming months, what's most important is for the P5+1 to stay focused on the fact that they do have leverage, not to give up that leverage before they have the deal. It's their only leverage in a very difficult negotiation where Iran actually has the upper hand as far as the structure of this negotiation. Hopefully that message has sunk in. They understand that. That's their only hope for getting a deal at the end. But as I said, it's going to be a rocky, rocky road for the next 6 months.
Well, we've seen Israel, primarily Prime Minister Netanyahu, leading the path here in terms of the hard line against any kind of agreement here. After this deal was reached, where does this leave Israel, Dr. Pardo?
Well, I think Israel will continue basically with on two tracks. One of them would be the diplomacy/education. Israel will have to do much more. It did a lot. It should do more to explain the gravity and the weight of the situation that is really endangering not only the region but the entire world. So this is one thing that Israel is definitely going to do, and Israel will continue to spend money on defense. And I guess they are not going to stop any defense project, and this is also part of the equation. But I would like to point to another thing that people are not so much aware. Iran is living in sanctions now for 35 years almost, and the question is whether the regime, Khamenei, is really interesting in lifting the sanctions. Everybody assumed that Iran wants the sanctions off. But if the sanctions are off and you have this kind of beautiful reconciliation with the United States, why do Iran needs all this revolutionary system with the perks, with the Revolutionary Guard? The entire system is built on an ongoing conflict. So if, let's say, the Western side, they lift 10% of 100% sanctions, the Iranians really want only 20% lifted because they want to live in this ongoing emergency situation. So for them, if we go six months down the road and 10% of the sanctions have been taken away by the world, and the other 10% by all kinds of Iranian adjustment to the situation, this will leave the West with very little cards, and actually, paradoxically, this agreement may lead to a war, because then the U.S. will have to decide. Either we let Iran have this project or go for a brinkmanship. And in brinkmanship, we know from Iranian history that they often go all the way to the end of the cliff and jump from it. And we've seen it in several historical occasions. So there is a kind of a dangerous path that is also possible.
Dr. Landau, do you agree or disagree with this sentiment that sanctions are what brought them to the table here in the first place, the Iranians? That they
Look, I can only go by statements that have been made by Rouhani. We know that the economic situation in Iran is quite bad. We know that Rouhani has been talking about this since before the elections. This was his major criticism of Ahmadinejad, right? That he criticized Ahmadinejad not because he pushed forward the nuclear program, but that he started paying a heavy price in terms of Iran's economic situation. It seems that this was part of the reason that he was elected. Not the whole reason, but it was part of the reason he was elected. And he's been very clear about the fact that he is the president that is going to, improve the economy. So in those terms, while it could be true what was said here about the sanction situation and that they need this tension and difficulty in order to justify the continued regime, it seems that the sanctions, we wouldn't probably see Iran coming to the table in the way they have come to the table if it was not for the pressure of sanctions. And we saw it play out in the negotiations. We saw the Iranians come with different demands, and we saw them back down from those demands. And I believe that that is due to the leverage that the international community now has in a manner that it never had before. This is new. This is from 2012. For years, the P5+1 and the international community was negotiating at a clear disadvantage because they had no leverage. They were dependent on a negotiated settlement, and Iran had no interest really in negotiations except as a means of playing for time and pushing forward their program. For the first time, we do see a change, and they are, you see the leverage working. It hasn't worked yet to the point where they're willing to back down from their military aspirations. But I do believe that with more pressure, sanctions, and I believe a credible threat of military force should have been on the table the whole time. It's an important lever of pressure that was not used well by the Obama administration, to say the least. That could have helped in pushing Iran, to get to that point where they're actually willing to make that U-turn in the nuclear realm that the international community is looking for.
Well, Dr. Pardo, to take it back to you, Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically taking the hardest line possible against this program. Not mincing words here. Do you agree with his extreme skepticism over this issue, with his position that he's essentially the corner that he's put the Israeli government into in a way?
I think somebody needs to tell the truth. And I don't think he puts Israel in the corner, because what Netanyahu is saying is very, very carefully being listened to in Iran. And the Iranians assume that this is what their European negotiators actually think. And they have Israel to say and pronounce things. That's why I was talking about education. This is extremely important for the Iranian side and for public opinion. Now, from the Obama point of view, he cannot say all of these things. He cannot threaten. Why he cannot do it? Because for years now, we have Iranian lobby, well paid, heftily paid, Iranian lobby inside the United States, arguing all the time, it's America's fault, it's America's fault, you did this, you treat the Iranians with condescension, you are not polite, you do not appreciate. So we see Obama all the way, he calls the president and the telephone is not being answered, and he calls again, and he's not talking, of course, with Khamenei, but this president that is an official. So we see actually the West being, they're going the extra mile and another extra mile, and I don't know. So it's either either it shows on a great weakness on the part of America, or it shows on a very on a way of patience.
Fortunately, I have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
We're out of time. Thank you both for being here and giving us your insight on this. That ends our daily debate. Stay tuned for the one-on-one.